We're going to be looking at some of the key takeaways from Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry, and we're going to be looking at this through the Guardian's eyes, guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here. We're going to be looking at some of the key takeaways from Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry here through The Guardian. Now, as of the time of this recording, there'll be some updates later on from the day that have not been added to this key takeaway. So I just want to put that important caveat in there. However, most of what's happened today and what has been referenced will also be added in there. So the headline is Boris Johnson is at the COVID inquiry, the key takeaways. The ex-PM is scheduled to be questioned for 2 days, and here are some of the main points from the first session at the inquiry. So at the time of this recording, it is Wednesday the 6th, and he will also be taking questions again tomorrow. Again, that will be Thursday on the 7th. So he will be taking questions obviously there. So before I obviously talk about that, I'm going to talk about my experience, because I've just sat and watched 6 hours of Boris Johnson in this COVID inquiry, and what I learned is from this inquiry and from what the former Prime Minister has been saying is pretty much essentially is that I didn't feel a sense of a man that's taking ownership and responsibilities for his duties, despite the fact that he took an oath from the Bible, despite the fact that at the start of it he was asked whether he accepted his that at the end of the day the main the culprit and the main person at the helm was him. But at no point did he admit that he had made mistakes. He admitted that with hindsight things could have been different, and we heard that a lot from Matt Hancock with his part of the COVID inquiry. But I felt that I generally felt that throughout the whole ordeal, I didn't feel a man there that I saw a man that was somber or forgiveness or somebody who felt that he could have done better. He seems to go going towards the term hindsight a lot, and there were times where he tried to challenge Hugo Keith on some of the evidence, and he even lied about some of the evidence that he put before he came to his hearing, which is quite extraordinary. He's a pathological liar, and it has been proven time and time again. And to be honest, if you don't even need to have watched it to have known that you were expecting him to be a bit of a pathological liar. Even the chairman, Baroness, had, when asking a few questions, there were one or two clips I've seen online and you could see that they knew they were going to have a hard time getting answers out of him. I want to say credit where credit's due to Hugo Keith, who was asking the questions, and I thought he did a very professional job, as he has been throughout the whole inquiry. It's extremely difficult job, because you want to really bash him, but at the same time you can't at the same time. It's also worth mentioning as well, Boris Johnson is the reason this COVID inquiry is happening. He's the one who pulled the trigger on it, and he didn't have to do that. It's very important to put that caveat in there as well. So you have to give Boris Johnson that credit, because this inquiry was set up by him, was approved by him. That's the only caveat you can kind of give there. Okay, so I'm not praising Boris Johnson in any way, shape or form, but I want to put that on the record in this video, because it's important to make that point there. He was very keen not to finger point at anybody as well, despite the fact that there were evidence where he said about certain people as well in these evidence that he gave as well. He was very keen to kind of just not really knock people down. He wanted to kind of just wanted to keep to his own, despite the fact that there was evidence there showing that he basically swore and said certain things about certain people. He was very keen not to respond directly to them. just another point as well, in case anybody asking, Partygate was not brought up in any way, shape or form. I don't know if Partygate will be brought up on the second day either, because the whole point of the COVID inquiry, and it's really important to emphasise this, because I know there's people watching here and they will be expecting criminal charges, and obviously that's as much as you guys want that. There may come down the road, but that's not the point of the COVID inquiry. The point of the COVID inquiry is to find out what happened, why things happened, what do we learn from them. That is the whole point of this COVID inquiry. That is the key point, the key reason we have in this COVID inquiry. This is not a criminal case. This is not like a criminal charge where Boris Johnson is going to be thrown under a bus or anything. That is essentially what this is about, guys, and it's really important to. I just want to make that point there as well. So based on what I've heard and given everything that I've taken in, I have been obviously keeping an eye on things on Twitter. I've seen a lot of counter arguments. Obviously, I've come across to what some things that Boris Johnson has said, evidence that's been put in front of Johnson considering what he has said. It's clear there have also been times where he wanted to waffle on quite a bit too much, and I think Hugo basically cut it off because he didn't want too much time was so that too much time was not taken away. So I think that was handled as well very well. But of course there will be more to talk about this as we go along, guys. So let's read in some of the key takeaways from the inquiry, and then I'll give my final thoughts as usual, guys. So Boris Johnson has been giving evidence at the UK's public inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic, where he was questioned on the decisions he made as the Prime Minister during that time. The appearance of Johnson, who was the Prime Minister for 3 years between 2019 and 2022, which has been mostly eagerly awaited moment so far in the inquiry overseen by a former judge. It has implications for both Johnson's legacy and potentially the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who served under him as Britain's Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer during the pandemic. Sunak is due to give evidence to the inquiry later this month. Johnson resigned in disgrace in September 22 after a series of scandals, including reports that he and other officials had been present at alcohol-fueled gatherings during the 2020 and 2021 at Downing Street, the official residence and offices of Britain's Prime Minister. So here are some of the key takeaways from the first day of the 2 days of the evidence. So we started, Johnson began his appearance by issuing an apology as expected from what he described as the pain and the loss of suffering during the pandemic. However, even as Johnson was attempting to deliver his words, 4 people who staged a protest into the inquiry and were removed, saying that they didn't want his apology. The dead can't hear your apologies, read signs held up by those who were removed. Can I just say how glad I am to be at this inquiry and how sorry I am for the pain and loss of suffering of the COVID victims, Johnson had said in remarks about that he had been expected to make. So there apparently they made statements to Sky News, those who were taken out of it, the protesters. I have not seen the clip as of the time of this recording, but I'm sure if you guys go out of your way, you'll probably find it at some point on there. And I just want to reiterate something as well, because obviously there was a video I put out earlier today about those who make out of this way to come to this inquiry. I am angry too. I understand the hatred. I understand the anger of this man and the damage that this man has caused to your lives and to this country. I understand that. I really, really do. But protesting it in there is not going to bring back those lives that have been lost. It's not going to solve. It's not going to change anything as of right now. It's not going to do anything. The whole point of the COVID inquiry is to find out what happened, why it happened, and what we can learn from it. And he has to give his evidence. I understand that people don't want to hear him waffle. I understand that frustration. But remember, this is the guy. This guy is the one who set up the COVID inquiry. And I understand the hatred towards him. Again, I want to stress this. I understand that. I really do. But protesting in there is not gonna solve everything. You know, if you can't handle listening to him, don't be there. You know, I understand. And if you want to scream and shout, do it in another room away from him, because I can understand that feeling, because there were times when I was listening to him even I wanted to scream and shout because he refused to answer direct questions. But this is not the way to do it. As opposed to him saying pain, loss, and suffering, you can't take what he says seriously. He's a pathogen liar. That is up to you if you want to take his words seriously or not. So the next point is about 5,000 WhatsApp messages on Boris Johnson's phones from 30th of January 2020 to June 2020 were unavailable to the inquiry it emerged. The disappearance of the messages, which Johnson had previously denied deleting, had been a long-running controversy. The barrister acting for the inquiry, Hugo Keith, the King's Counsel, said that a technical report provided by the former Prime Minister's solicitor suggested there may have been a factory reset at the end of January 2020 following an attempt to reinstate the contents in June 2020. But Johnson denied knowledge of that. I don't remember such thing, he said. So I'm not buying this whatsoever because WhatsApp keep updated logs. I think it's just a case of evidence being held. Basically, I think that's what it is. I think it's just being withheld from the COVID inquiry. I think that's generally what it is. I don't think there's any more to add to that. He's holding back evidence there, and someone put a Twitter poll up. What were the couple of reasons why they could be? So one of them said Russian messages. Another one said another mistress. Another one said blackmail, and another one like just all these silly ones. But like, and Supertansky basically said replied saying all of them. Which is yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were all the case, to be fair. But yeah, they have acquired so much evidence, the COVID inquiry team, they really have, and a little bit of evidence has been taken from them. So the other thing is, Johnson said he took responsibility for all decisions made, but the first mistake he admitted to concern the mixed messages from the UK government was the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I want to reiterate here, the way throughout the pandemic and the way it was portrayed to me during that time, and you guys can disagree with me in the comments, is that it was kind of like whatever Scotland were doing, England was slowly following behind. We had a very, I want to give credit where credit is due. Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely fantastic for Scotland throughout the whole COVID-19. I think she handled it both professionally and did everything that she could for the people of Scotland to try and prevent the virus from spreading and save as many lives as possible. And everything that she was doing was the intent of saving lives. And it seemed like England seemed to have been following along on suit to Scotland behind. That's how it came across to me. Wales and Northern Ireland are differentiating. So he said here, we relied so much on messaging to help contain the virus, and we need the public to understand the message in a straightforward a way as possible. And he really did, by large, he said. But sometimes there should be one message from his own office, a slightly different one from Scotland or wherever. Yeah, there was a bit of a different messaging between Scotland and England, I think, I think the messaging was more of the same between England and Wales, in the difference from Mark Drayford. It wasn't too different, I don't believe it was. I think it was very different, obviously, over in Northern Ireland, because obviously there was borderless between Northern Ireland and Republic Island, so there would have been a lot more cooperation between those two nations, I'm sure, over there. Asked about the allegations of former advisor and minister who claimed that there was a toxic culture at Number 10 when he was Prime Minister, Johnson likened it to previous governments by Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher. So a toxic culture of backstabbing and misogyny had already been laid bare at the COVID public inquiry. Key figures had been Dominic Cummings, Johnson's former and now estranged chief advisor, who was accused in October of aggressive, foul-mouthed and misogynic abuse towards others working in government. Johnson said he would make a distinction between the language used and the decision-making. The Blair and Thatcher government also had challenging and competitive characters whose views about each other might not be fit to print, but they got an awful lot done. They did get an awful lot done, but the evidence is quite loud and quite clear that it was chaos and it was all over the place. And he kind of really just did not address that directly, in my opinion, throughout this session. He did not. He kind of just tried to ping the answer elsewhere, sort of thing. So I don't think Hugo could really get a straight answer for Boris Johnson on that. To be fair, he couldn't get straight answers on a lot of things, if I'm honest, because of who he is. But it was there. It was there, but he tried to liken it to Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher, and that just really triggered me. I was just like, what has Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair got to do with what's going on here? This is about you and your government, and he trying to deflect and pull away, and I felt at times he was just trying to buy time as well during this as well. He was doing a lot of sucking up to the Baroness and Keith, praising the COVID inquiry as well. He was doing a lot of that throughout the ordeal as well. I think that's also to point out. So Johnson defended Matt Hancock, who was the health secretary for much of the pandemic, who had become a lightning rod for criticism by others in government, despite internal calls to sack him. Asked about WhatsApp messages from Cummings to dismiss Hancock, Johnson said, "If you're a prime minister and you're consistently being lobbied to by somebody to sack somebody else, it is just what I'm afraid happens. Everybody consistently militarizing against some other individuals for some reason. It is perfectly true that his advisor in particular had a low opinion of the health secretary. I thought he was wrong. I stuck by the health secretary, and I thought the health secretary worked very hard, and whatever he may have had in defects, I thought he was doing his very best in very difficult circumstances, and I thought he was a very good communicator. He was such a good communicator that he sent positive COVID cases to care homes, guys, because he wanted to put a ring around the care home. You guys remember that? Yeah, that same health secretary. He did a crap job, just like the Prime Minister did, if I'm just going to be perfectly honest. And this was we don't know the truth between Cummings, Hancock, and Johnson, I would say. But what I will say is that he should have dismissed Hancock. He was not up for the job. He was not good enough, and he was more concerned about filling his own pocket. And Dominic Cummings was also out to gain more power as well. There was bad blood between those two for sure about the way it was handled. Matt Hancock at times was absolutely blooming useless, or as somebody said, totally effing useless. I think those were the words that Dominic Cummings used. So just to put that out there, but just the blood, Johnson kind of like not really going to. He never really slammed Cummings in any way, shape, or form either. He was kind of just keeping again, just trying to stay, shall we say, neutral. But yeah, praising Matt Hancock. Yeah, I know. COVID decisions was too male dominated, Johnson admitted. The gender balance of my team should have been better, Johnson told the inquiry. The inquiry previously heard from Helen Nakanawa, a senior civil servant, who was the role of the Deputy Cabinet Secretary. There was institutional bias against women in the COVID decision making. Johnson, who was the Mayor of London between 2008 and 2019, appeared to accept this, and he said, "When I was running London, it was 50-50. It was a very harmonious team. I think sometimes during the pandemic, too many meetings were too male dominated." Have to agree with him. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. Kind of glad he admits it, but it should have been more a fairer balance, and it wasn't. The experience across crises across other diseases meant there was not sufficient allowed. I don't know what that word means. Within the UK government, Johnson claimed. Johnson was speaking after he was questioned about what he was told about the emergence of COVID-19 in China, telling the inquiry that he had not been aware of an early estimation of British officials that 800,000 people could have died in the UK. He said he had not seen the figure and had seen a different one towards the end of February, about which time our alarm was well and truly raised, he added. Johnson argued those in the UK government and that advisers were unable to comprehend the implications of what we actually looking at, may have acted differently if they had stopped to think about the mathematical implications. The former Prime Minister maintained that he didn't blame anyone, but said the experience of previous crises, such as around the emergence of several acute respiratory systems, SARS, meant the alarm was not sounded loud enough. Keith reminded him that evidential documents showed that he had been urged against an overreaction. Yeah, so I think he was very indecisive. I think it's a good thing to make. He was very indecisive, I think is the best way to put it when talking about this. It's very important to point out as well is that the World Health Organization had declared at the end of January that this was going to be a major what's the word? I can't remember what exactly it was said, guys. They declared something at the end of January that basically made people really wake up and take notice of the repercussions that were going to be taking place I'm just going to try and bring it up now to remind myself of it, because I think it's really, really important to highlight to you guys the situation that was coming. And I seem to have misplaced it. It was really important information from the WHO. I do apologise if I don't have it here. Yeah, it was. So this was in 2000 January. This was a report. Data reported on the 31st of January 2020. So this was from the World Health Organization. The Emergency Committee on the Novel Coronavirus under the International Health Regulations was reconvened on January the 1st. WHO declared the outbreak to be a public health emergency of international concern. So it was of international concern. So it was already been highlighted at the end of January as something that needs to be taken serious. Like, if you're not taking this seriously, you need to take it now. So things were not being taken seriously by the Prime Minister. I don't know if it'll be brought up in the points here, but I also want to put this out there as well. So during the Cobra meetings, there were 5 Cobra meetings in the run-up as well. There were several Cobra meetings that Boris Johnson did not attend, if you may or may not recall. Boris Johnson said Matt Hancock had a hand on it because he attended them and he was the health secretary. So I think that's another thing to add to that if you weren't aware. So Johnson admitted he vastly underestimated the risks in early stages of the pandemic. The former Prime Minister said both he and Whitehall more generally failed to understand the seriousness of the pandemic in late January and February 2020. Asked why information on the 29th of January about the virus spread outside China did not become a light bulb moment, Johnson said, "I don't think that we were able to comprehend the implications of what we were actually looking at. The problem was that I don't think we attached enough credentials to those forecasts because of the experience that we had with each other as ZNS diseases. I think collectively in Whitehall there was not a sufficient loud enough claxton." He added, "It is clear that we vastly underestimated the risks of the early week. If we properly understood how fast COVID was spreading and the fact that it was spread asymptomatically, there are many things that would have done differently. We were operating on a fallacious inductive logic about previous reasons, worst case scenarios." He was still not taking it seriously at this point. And when it was hitting Italy, he could claim he was concerned, but again, he was not taking it seriously enough. That's the main crux of that information. I'm just going to add on there, guys. Johnson questioned scientists on closing the borders in February 2020. Johnson admitted he was worried about potential public pressures to close borders as the virus began to spread in February 2020. Previously, Cummins had told the inquiry at this stage that Johnson had asked, "Aren't people going to think we're mad for not closing the borders?" On Wednesday, the former Prime Minister conceded, "I may have said something like that." He continued that, "I thought it was a point worth picking up with the scientists. I wanted to understand the reasons why borders controls didn't work." When it came to the borders, there was an overwhelming scientific consensus, as far as I understood it, that trying to interrupt the virus was tougher border controls brought you really very little, or you might delay by a matter of days and perhaps weeks. But you would not stop the virus from entering the UK. I think a lot of people in the country found it very hard to understand. I think, the fact that they didn't close the borders as early as they did, I think was a big, big effing mistake. And we only need to look at New Zealand as a prime example of how they didn't have to shut down their entire economy. And I think if we had a different Prime Minister, if we had Jeremy Corbyn, maybe the borders would have been closed and perhaps maybe less lives would have been lost. I think that's a very important caveat to put in there. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the virus wouldn't hit in the UK, because I think it still would have, and it would have been difficult to trace it. Because I do believe at that time, I do believe that coronavirus was already in the country, in the United Kingdom, in January, but it just hadn't spread it as rapidly then. But not closing the borders fast enough, that should have been done much, much, much quicker. Johnson insisted he was working during the February half-term school break of 2020 to focus on controversy over an alleged lack of engagement. The inquiry previously heard from the 14th of February to the 24th of February 2020. Johnson was on a break in the Chiveling House, country residence used by British Prime Ministers, and was not updated by his staff about COVID and had no briefings. On 2 Cobra meetings that took place in this period, but Johnson insisted this was not accurate. There wasn't a long holiday, and that I took. I was working throughout that period in the tempo did increase. He said he rang both the Chinese President Xi Jinping in part to discuss the origins of COVID and to compare notes on what was happening, and then the then US President Donald Trump to discuss the same thing. Johnson said that in a February 28 meeting, in the worst case scenario, figures were presented were a horrifying figure and he couldn't believe it. I thought, well, plenty had bad few pandemics in the UK, and if it's milder, then it won't be an exceptional thing at all. So why am I also being told that the WCS is 5,000, half a million, basically? He should not have gone on that break. He's claiming he was working during that break. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. He wasn't that up to date. I don't believe. The fact that he even took that break at that time was like, considering what was happening, the alarm bells are already starting to ring. He should never have taken that break. It's pretty obvious. Last thing here, the inquiry chair rebucked Johnson's for leak of the witness statement. So this was at the start, guys. So before Johnson's evidence began, the chair of the inquiry, Lady Hullett, complained about the media briefing about what he would tell the inquiry. She said, "I'd like to express my concerns about the reports in the press over the last few days over the contents of Mr. Johnson's witness statement to the inquiry and what his evidence will be. Until a witness is called and appears at a hearing of the inquiries published in the witness statement, it is meant to be confidential between the witness, the inquiry, and the court participants. Failure to respect confidentiality undermines the inquiry's ability to do its job fairly, effectively, and independently." Johnson is under the media's, it's basically the media's BITCH, essentially. So, and he's going to do whatever the media tells him to because it puts him in a spotlight. So the reason that what we heard about what Johnson was going to say was leaked, like him potentially invading the Netherlands, which is absolutely a true story. Yeah, this is all for publicity, but should not have been leaked in any way, shape, or form, guys. So there's some of the key stuff there from the inquiry. Obviously, I know this is a long video, so I'm just going to come up to my final thoughts because I know this one's quite a long one for you guys. So what are my final thoughts? Obviously, there is still another day of information as well. I have not decided whether I'm going to put myself through watching another 6 hours of Boris Johnson. I have not decided if I want to do that. But what I will say is that it is so important that we learn lessons from this. But given that it is a former Conservative Prime Minister of a Conservative political party that doesn't know the meaning of the word learning from mistakes or the word sorry, it's kind of hard for me to take that in. It was a very tough day for those. Emotions were running high. The chairman also had to also point out that to some people that a bit later on, after those protesters were let out, she had to tell people that they have to keep quiet and let, you know, it's an emotional time, of course, but they have to let the inquiry do its role. And it was not easy whatsoever for her. It was not easy for Hugo Keith. I think, like I said, I thought he did a terrific job. But Boris Johnson, he doesn't. I don't think he really understands the implications of some of the actions and the words that he has said there. His words feel very hollow. They come across as hollow, and that's how a lot of us really see it. But there will be more to come, of course, guys. So what do you guys make of my feelings and what I've said about this inquiry with Boris Johnson so far? Some of the key takeaways of it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. If you can, hit the like button, be greatly appreciated. Share this across social media, and if you hit that bell notification icon, you'll be notified of when I upload another video. And also, if you want to financially support me this Christmas, which I would greatly appreciate, you can do so by buying me a coffee or joining me on Patreon. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.